Hey everybody, my name is Travis and I'm an alcoholic. Pretty good turnout today. Everybody must be here for the bowling afterwards. See, some people got it. I have a sobriety date. It is 9/11/2016. And before I speak, I always like to do this. My sponsor once told me that God is a gentleman, and he will not invite himself into a conversation without being asked. So I always like to take about 30 seconds and invite my God in, and I welcome you all to do the same. And if you don't have one, feel free to borrow mine. Okay, once again, my name is Travis and I am an alcoholic. I wish I could say that speaking in front of a group like this is easy for me, but it's not, at least not without drinking. Kind of give you a background of my story. I always like to start out this because this was kind of a defining moment in my life. I come from two loving parents. They were never married. I couldn't have asked for better parents. I had everything that I could ever possibly want or need. Probably nothing that I ever wanted, but I had everything that I could absolutely need. They were never together my entire life. I have one memory of them together, and that was the fight that ended their relationship. And like I said, that was never an issue. As far as having joint custody parents, it was just, I would have never known the difference. Like I said, they loved me equally the same. I saw them both equally. And with that being said, one of my other earliest memories, and this is the defining one, is I remember when I was probably 5-6 years old, me and my mom had gone to the grocery store, and she had bought some can of frosting for probably one of my birthday cakes or something. And when she wasn't looking, I was in the backseat of the car. I opened that thing up and took a big old chunk out of it. And when we got home, she sat there and looked at me and asked me if I did it. And I looked her straight in the eyes and I told her, absolutely not. I would never do that. And that's who I am, or that's not who I am today, but that's who I was for a long time. I am by nature a liar. I tend to lie, exaggerate, overextend the truth. It's just what I do, and I'm going to do my best to be completely honest. You'll probably actually hear me correct myself a couple times, because that's the kind of lifestyle I try to live today. So, growing up, I went to pretty much, I lived in a couple of sketchy areas. I'm from Toledo, Ohio. It's northwest. It's about 35 miles south of Detroit. It's totally a blue-collar town. My mom was a respiratory therapist and then became a teacher, and my dad was a firefighter for the city. If I wouldn't have screwed everything up so bad, I would have been a fourth-generation firefighter. Not to say that I didn't try, but that's not what God played out for me, and that's okay today. I started out, like I said, in a pretty bad neighborhood is where I lived. But like I said, I think it was by the time I was first grade, I was in a really prominent school district. It was actually one of the finers until recently. And I had a very good education for the most part. I was always smart. I never once had to apply myself to anything. God gave me a lot of natural abilities and gifts, and I never once applied myself to anything because I never had to. I was always able to just get by. And somewhere around 6th grade, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but my last week of school I had been expelled, and it wasn't a big deal. I moved on, went to junior high. And I always like to say I suffered from the I was the big fish in elementary school, and then I moved into this big pond, and the world kind of became a scary place for me. And that's when I was first introduced to that summer. I was first introduced to, you know, I know this is Alcoholics Anonymous, but drugs do play a major part of my story. But the common denominator always for me was alcohol, so that's why I consider myself an alcoholic. But I started out smoking marijuana, and which very quickly escalated into hallucinogens. I think by 7th, 8th grade, I was, and all the signs were there that I suffered from the ism. My drug dealers used to say, when your drug dealers are showing concern for you, you might have a problem. And I remember several times they'd be like, you know, you're going through an awful lot of this, and I know you're not getting rid of it to anybody. And that was okay, though. You know, like I said, at that time I wasn't drinking yet. It really wasn't much longer afterwards. I think I was a freshman in high school, maybe a sophomore at best, and I had definitely become a full-blown weekend drinker. My dad worked 24 hours, 48, worked 24, off 48, and then with my mom being a school teacher, she was always constantly busy, and I'm a very manipulative person, and what I did is I'd manipulate those schedules to basically I was just running the streets. It was no fault of theirs. Like I said, I come across as a very good kid. I, for the most part, held A's and B's, and like I said, I played sports up until my freshman year in high school. At that point, I decided I was going to be a skateboarder and threw away any chance I ever had of playing sports again. And that was okay, because at that time, all I cared about was drugs and alcohol. I did something every day. I used to get angry at my dad because what he would do is the days that I wasn't smoking, he'd sit there and question me and accuse me of being on drugs because I was off to him, and that was very rare. So that's kind of where I started out, and it only gets a little worse before it gets better. So I went throughout high school, like I said, and my high school, I'm not sitting there taking anybody's inventory, but drugs and alcohol were a big part. It didn't matter who you hung out with. Everybody was always partying. You know, that's like kind of what we lived to do on the weekends. And that's what we did. And for me, it carried over into the weekdays. And I remember taking my first drink, and it kind of stuck to it for a long time. I was never one for the taste of alcohol. I only liked the effects. I would sit there and force myself to drink to the point where I was throwing up, and then just to get that feeling, that sensation, because I don't like being myself. It's something I struggled with for a long time. I don't know why. I feel I was born an alcoholic. I didn't sit there and just all of a sudden one day become one. I think my brain was wired backwards from the very start. And I'm sure if you sat there and really got into it with my parents, I'm sure all the mannerisms were there as well. Like I said, I'm okay with that today. Acceptance is a big part of my sobriety. And with that being said, what happened for me was all throughout high school, I hung with the wrong kids. Like I said, I never really had a whole lot of consequences. A bunch of my friends always got underage drinking or DUIs. I was just very fortunate. I was doing all those things. By 17, I had a fake ID, and I was going out to the bars. And like I said, I never liked to drink, but I really liked the effect I got from it. And at some point, I started getting into harder drugs. I think by 17, I was doing a lot of cocaine and drinking, because when I did the cocaine, it allowed me to keep drinking more. And like I said, it produced the effect that I liked. And what ended up happening is I had this, I call her my high school sweetheart. Now looking back, it was probably more like she was my high school hostage, because I tormented that girl and all she ever did was care for me. And if I look back, that's kind of been a pattern for all my relationships. People that care for me, like I said, I tend to manipulate and destroy their lives. I take really good people and I bring them down with me to where I want to be. And what happened is I was first introduced to the Fellowship of Cocaine Anonymous at the age of 19. She had given me an ultimatum, which was first of many. And I remember going to those meetings, and I could care less. I was going out and getting high right afterwards. Nothing was ever going to stick at that point. And looking back now, I really wish it would have, because the life I've been given is pretty amazing right now. And so with that being said, I tormented that girl for another 3 to 4 years. We were always on and off again because, like I said, I always drank, but kind of a major part in my life. And I don't want to place blame, because ultimately they were always all my decisions. But what ended up happening is I think I was around the age of 20, and I had a best friend. I don't want to say betrayed him, but I was not being a very good friend to him. And ultimately I ignored all the signs. He was really struggling, and what ended up happening, he inevitably ended up taking his life in front of me. And at that point, I had just kind of gotten into painkillers. Like I said, it took me a few tries to get those into my system. When I first started taking pain pills, they were too strong, it made me throw up. But I found, like anything I've ever done, if you just sit there and push through it, you really get to produce the effect you want produced. And I remember, like I said, he literally had done it in front of me, and I'd watched my best friend die. And what ended up happening was, I ended up, as soon as the cops let us go, I ended up going and finding drugs. And I ended up going, because we had, I guess we were a trio of friends. This was the kid he was actually living with at the time. And I had to go tell him that Matt had killed himself. And I remember sitting there going into his parents' kitchen and sitting there crushing up 2 pills and snorting them and saying, "Hey, don't judge me. You don't know what I've been through." And that's where it all kind of turned around for me. That's where my life really started going downhill. Me and that girl, at that point I was binge drinking every single day. I'm a binge drinker by nature. And after that, me and that girl broke up, and I was just totally strung out. And I told myself I can't live this kind of life anymore. And I guess, as my sponsor would call it, a moment of clarity. So what I did is something I've learned to do really well also, is I jumped ship. I was given the opportunity. I moved down to Florida, and I took off. And with that being said, like I said, I don't sit there and do relationships very well. And what ended up happening is the way I ended this relationship with a girlfriend that I was with for over, I think we were together almost 5 years. And the way I ended it, I'm not saying she was trying to kill herself, but I got a call the next morning from her parents asking what had happened the night before. And I told her that, we had broken up, which was the exact opposite. It was me being about the biggest ass I could possibly be to her, telling her I was going to be the one to get the last word in. And what ended up happening is, she was okay. She moved on. We're actually friends today, believe it or not. But I moved down to Florida, and that was my first time withdrawing, or detoxing, however you want to look at it. And it really wasn't that terrible. Most of my family's in the medical profession. I remember the drive down. My dad was driving me down. I ended up sleeping the entire time. When I got there, I was still sick as a dog. And, my uncles, I got an aunt and uncle, they're EMTs, and they ended up getting me an IV and hooked me up. And I remember sitting on the couch at my uncle's house just with an IV in me, and like I could feel the fluid and life coming back, and you know, it was okay. And what ended up happening is I dodged drugs for a long time. But what ended up I started doing was drinking more and more. And at that time, I was turning 21. I started acquiring the taste for alcohol. It wasn't just what I could find, like my dad's Popov vodka, and you know, I started finding drinks I actually liked, and from there it really took off. Like I said, it was Florida. I was living on the beach, rum runners, and women everywhere. It was great. And what ended up happening is I was given an opportunity. Once again, you know, 2 months later after I broke up with this girl, I find another one, man, and I'm just madly in love. You know, 3 months later, she's living with me, and, you know, we're going to sit there and move over to the West Coast, and, or East Coast. I was on the West Coast, so I'm going to move over to the East Coast, and like I said, once again, God doing for me, because I just happened to have a great career opportunity land in my lap. I was asked to join the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Union. They make great money, and you know, like I said, I was just tickled pink. You know, I didn't really have to do anything. It kind of applied to what I knew, and I was able to just sit there and move forward in life. And I was with this girl for about 4 years, or about 4 years into our relationship. We were living on the East Coast, and once again, as always, I was out drinking, and whenever I drink, the drugs tend to find me. And what ends up happening is those drugs carry over into my everyday life. And so she was okay with some of this stuff. Her mom was actually an alcoholic. I think she's still recovering, I'm not sure. I tend to stay away from that relationship. But I was introduced once again because I started finding the one thing I really like is opiates. And like I said, I was given another ultimatum by her. And what ended up happening was I ended up was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time. I remember going to this meeting. I thought these people were just crazy as all could be, and I wanted nothing to do with it. And I quickly turned my back on it, and then she told me about another fellowship, Narcotics Anonymous. I guess it doesn't matter, but I probably shouldn't have said that. But I was introduced to that fellowship, and I kind of could relate. You know, that's why I was told the fellowships, other fellowships exist. It's all about relating. And what ended up happening is I was able to relate, and I kind of liked it. So I did that for about 6 months. And then I was with that same girl, and she nor probably did I understand the effects that alcohol would produce in me. And what ended up happening is she said I'd become no fun. I remember I called my sponsor. I don't think I'd actually worked any steps at that time, but I called him. He didn't answer, and I picked up a drink. And then from there it was on. It took me to a place where I never thought I'd ever go. It took me to a place where I said I never ever would go. And within a month's time I was intravenously using dope. And I did that for another 2 years. And by the grace of God, I ruined everything down in Florida. I'll be quite honest, the only reason I wasn't homeless is Florida has excellent squatters' rights. You know, they require a year before they can just throw you out on the street. And that was literally the only reason I had never been homeless. And what ended up happening was I did what I do best. I was given another chance by another person that I'd known, grown over the years. He kind of mentored me in work, and he was up here in North Carolina. And, you know, he gave me a chance, and I came up here with the intention of bringing my ex with me. And Then I got here and they were like, well, you can't bring her. Part of the reason you were allowed to come up here is if you ended it with her. So I just nonchalantly stopped answering my phone. A girl I was with for almost 8 years, I just ignored her calls. And then about a month later, I went down to Florida, rented a U-Haul truck, surprised in on the apartment, grabbed a few things, and took off. And that was the last I've ever heard from her. To my understanding, I do have mutual friends, and like I said, once again, it was just another life I kind of destroyed. She was a devout Christian when I met her, and I'm not going to sit there and spread her business where she ended up, but I had taken her down to about as low as you could possibly go. And because, like I said, that's what I tend to do in my relationships. And then I came to North Carolina. I've been here now approximately 5 to 6 years. One of the main reasons I drink is to forget. And I moved to Aberdeen, and I said, wow, this town is great. I says, there's freaking 30 bars, and there's no stores or restaurants or anything in this town. I says, I'm right at home. And I says, there's golf everywhere. At the time, I used to just play golf nonchalantly, but then I became a big golf enthusiast because I could sit there and drink all day on the course. Even some courses would allow us to stay after hours, and we had our own key to the cages to put our carts up. And I would sit there and drink from 8 in the morning till 9 at night, and then go to the bars and close those out. And if I could find somebody that was willing to party, I would sit there and party with them at my house or wherever. Didn't matter. It was all about drinking. And I don't want to say I ever was a daily drinker. I've come pretty close. I was with this one girl, and I was drinking probably 5-6 times a day or a week. And never quite hit the 7-day constant, but I still don't. That was something I kind of struggled with when I first came into the rooms. Am I really an alcoholic? And I think, as the big book would say, I'm classified as a binge drinker. Once I start, I don't stop until I'm passed out or I'm out of booze. And that's kind of how I went for about 4 years. I got into some trouble at work. I went into a 2-day blackout because, once again, I had found a cocktail of drugs and alcohol that would sit there and allow me to forget everything that I had ever known. And like I said, I went into this 2-day bender, which I tried to go to work on a military base, and that's not a good idea, especially in a company vehicle. I was very fortunate to have very minimal consequences, but one of my stipulations was that I had to go to treatment. And at the time, I had no intentions of going to treatment. I was given the opportunity. They said I could take a layoff and go to treatment, or I could just be fired and be over with, because I had obviously failed my drug test, not that it even mattered at that point. And I had no intentions on going back to that company. For the most part, I'm a pretty employable person. Like I said, God has given me a lot of good talents. I'm not stupid by any means. Like I said, I've been able to get by mostly on my natural ability. And what ended up happening is I continued to party. In about 3 weeks after I had been let go, I was with these cats, and I had, at this point in my life, there was not too many things I hadn't done. There was only one more, and what I ended up doing is I ended up hitting that last thing on my bucket list of possible drugs to try that are in my lifetime. And I woke up the next morning and I told myself, you should really call that guy and get some more so we can keep this party going. And all of a sudden, like I said, my sponsor calls it a moment of clarity, God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. But what I ended up doing is I'd called a treatment center, and I decided I was going to go to treatment. I don't know that I went for the right reasons, probably not. 90% of the things I do are all for the wrong reasons. what ended up happening was I went to Wilmington Treatment Center, and I had never been so peaceful at mind. When I got there that first night, I was able to sit there and put my head on the bed, and it was just like for once in my life, like I had a peace of mind. All my troubles, all my worries, it's like I had finally given up that fight that I've been fighting for so long, and I don't even know for what. And certain things started happening to me as I was in that treatment center. What ended up happening was, I don't think he would mind, but there was this old timer. His name is Jeffrey. I don't know what his last name was, but he came in and he talked to us probably a couple times. I'm thinking he was coming in either once or twice a week. I was privileged to hear him speak about 3 or 4 times. That cat was super crazy. I couldn't relate to him at all, but one thing I did relate to was he had said that he had defined what an actual blackout was. I remember when I'd gone in there, they were asking me questions about like, oh, how many times have you blacked out? I'm like, oh yeah, I've only blacked out 5 times ever, you know? And other drugs were involved. And he defined what a blackout was. He says it's a momentary lapse in time in which you do not remember. And all of a sudden, those 5 blackouts, they turned into about 105, if not more. You know, like there was times I'd woken up in ditches. I'd sit there, I'd wake up. One morning, my knee was swollen like the size of a softball. No clue. Come home, all my truck tires are flat. Not a single recollection of how I had done these things. And all of a sudden, like I said, that moment of clarity, everything just kind of hit me. And I said, wow. I said, maybe I'm a little worse off than I thought. And then as I went to Wilmington and I was able to get through it, and I noticed something kind of changed. Like all of a sudden, I wasn't feeling as depressed. Life didn't suck so bad. I had no idea what I was going to do. I knew work was chomping at the bit to get me back, but I didn't even want to go back. I actually had to. My boss was willing to come pick me up from treatment so he could start me off working again. And this was a company that I had gone to treatment 2 or 3 times on. Down in Florida, I'd gone once or twice. They'd given me some leeway, time off to, you know, try to figure things out. And this was my 3rd time with them, and they were still wanting me back. And I just told them I couldn't do it. I says, first thing I got to do is I got to come to a meeting. And what I ended up doing is I didn't come to a meeting right away. I was so excited to be back in my own bed. I was like, forget that, I ain't going to a meeting. But fortunately, I didn't take a drink. And what ended up happening is I think I'd gotten out on a Saturday night, and I should say at this time I had already gotten my DUI. I couldn't drive. My mom had come and had to pick me up from treatment. So that's probably why I didn't go out that weekend. But what ended up happening is she dropped me off here. I think it was a Monday, a men's meeting, if I'm not mistaken, and or it might have been a Tuesday. I'm not even sure. But what ended up happening is I ended up coming in these rooms, and by nature I'm a terribly shy guy. I have a hard time, especially then. It's gotten so much better now, but I couldn't even look anybody in the eyes when I first came into these rooms. I was the guy I'd sit there and I'd sneak in and I'd be sitting in the back. They didn't want to talk to anybody. The only way you were going to get anything out of me is if you came up to me and said hi and extended your hand, and then I'd be like, okay, yeah, I'll shake your hand. I'm Travis. But and that's how it'd gone in the past for me at other meetings. And what I ended up doing is I came in that meeting and I stood up and I said, I'm Travis, I'm an alcoholic, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I just got out of treatment, I don't know what's going on, I'm in this total fog, and that's when my life started to change. I ended up going up to a guy, and he's not here, so I won't say his name, but I asked him, he's my sponsor. He said, here, hold on. goes and takes me to somebody else, and he's not here. He says, "Here, hold on." Goes and takes me to somewhere else. I got passed off like 3 or 4 different times before I was given my first sponsor. And for me, that's God working in my life, because in the past, whenever I pick a sponsor, I pick the one that I feel like I can get one over on, I can manipulate. And I don't know that I can manipulate this guy. He's pretty intimidating. He's probably one of the biggest guys in the rooms here. But he was my first sponsor, and only by the grace of God I've been able to stay sober because of him. And what he ended up doing was he sat there and he took me through the steps to the best of his ability. And then things started to change for me. What ended up happening is about 6 months, because I told you earlier about that 6 months and how I like to just take off. I didn't share earlier about that was, I think I picked up 6 months the day before I picked up that drink. And what ended up happening, I was feeling all squirrely around 6 months, even though I think I was about done with the steps. And what ended up happening is I opened up to him, because that's something I don't do very well. I like to sit there and put on this front, this mask, to sit there and hide myself from everybody. And what ended up happening is I got honest with him. And for the first time ever, I was able to get honest with myself. And I told him what was going on. And he says, "Well, Travis," he says, you don't even have a home group yet. He says, "You're 6 months in, you don't even have a home group." He's like, "Why don't you try doing that?" And against everything I wanted to do, I took his advice, and I went and got a home group. And I went to that home group meeting. And what ended up happening was I did the one thing I never ever wanted to do. I was building a lot of resentments against guys. I was feeling really out of place. And what ended up happening was at that home group, and this is my home group, by the way, Keeping It Sober group, I took the position of greeter. The one thing in the world I never thought I would do. And I'll be quite honest, I think that's when my spirituality and my life really started to take change. I stood at that back door there, and I sat there, and I held it open for everybody, and I shook their hands with the biggest smile I could possibly form, because I hate smiling. And I did that for an entire month. And then all of a sudden, all those resentments and the hatred I had towards other people, I'd come to realize it wasn't that I always thought they looked down on me, but the fact of the matter is I was never willing to let anybody in. And when I did that, that's when, like I said, things really started to take change for me. And after that, I started getting more involved in stuff. Like I said, that was the hardest thing I could ever do. But after that, it gave me the ability to sit there and come into a room and walk around and shake people's hands and introduce myself, especially to the newcomers. The newcomers are the most important people here. I can't stress that enough. I know the newcomers what keeps me sober today. And what ended up happening is I got more involved in that home group. And what ended up happening was through that home group, I got involved in some other things. About that time, I'd hit around 9 months, and I was completely done with the steps, and my sponsor was sitting there telling me, he's like, "Hey," he says, "I think you're ready to start sponsoring people now." And I'm like, "Yeah, right, dude, you're crazy." And what ended up happening was I told him, I says, "You know what?" Because he wanted, we're very fortunate to have a colony around here, and a lot of guys come through here, and, it gives you a great opportunity to start sponsoring people. And I told him, I says, "You know what?" I says, "I'm going to sit there and pray about it." I says, "What I'm going to do is I'm not going to sit there and go searching to sponsor somebody." I says, "But if somebody asked me, just like out of anything in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would gladly say yes." And around that time, there was a new guy coming in, and I had introduced myself a couple times because I was able to shake hands and look people in the eyes for once. And I think it was the second or third day I'd seen him. I was just asking him, "Hey, how you been?" And lo and behold, the most dreaded thing in the world happened. He asked me to be his sponsor. And I gladly said yes. And I say that because I remember feeling and this is entirely how I view it. But I remember seeing him, and when he approached me, he had that same fear in his eyes that I had when I first asked my sponsor. So there was no way in the world that I could tell him no. And, I'm very grateful today. He's still sober. And what ended up happening is I started getting more and more involved. I started shaking people's hands. I started doing things outside of these rooms. And then I got heavily involved in intergroup. It was for all the wrong reasons. I saw a lot of pretty women get involved in there, so I was like, okay, yeah, intergroup, sure, why not? And, that's what I do. I do everything for the wrong reasons, but it all works out. And now I actually hold a couple positions in intergroup. I am now the public information officer, and I'm the co-chair for intergroup. And with that being said, I have no idea what I'm doing. Kind of like when I came up here today, I was like, oh man. I was sitting there talking to my sponsor before the meeting and said, I try not to think about things before I come up and speak about them, because I really get into my head, and that can really mess with me. What I'll do is I'll sit there and I'll overthink and over everything. And I told him, I says, I did really good today. I says, I haven't thought about it one bit. I says, I'm a little scared. I won't know what to say. But so far it seems to have all worked out. And then, like I said, what ended up happening after I got involved in all these things, I started seeing these. I was never given the spiritual experience. No, shoot, I'll botch that up. I don't know where I was going to go. I never had the burning bush. I had the spiritual growth. Just like everything in my life, it took some time for everything to just kind of fall into place. I've sat there and I've tried to will my way multiple times into multiple situations, and it never works out. The best thing I've done today is I turn my will and my life and everything over to the care of God. And it's just God as I understand. And to me, that's why this is such a great program, is I don't have to sit there and follow a religious belief. I'm entitled to sit there and think, and my God can be whatever I want it to be, just as long as he keeps me sober and it allows me to stay out of my own way. Because today, the biggest danger I have is myself. When I stopped doing the things I was taught to do, there's only a couple things I do that I do religiously, and that's one, I pray when I get up. That's the first thing I do. And then I pray before I go to bed, and I do a gratitude list for all the things I'm grateful for, because I've been given so much for having so little at one point. And just a little funny story. I was talking to my mom the other day, because that's something I do nowadays. I don't sit there and I don't call her up telling her I need this, I need that. Some crazy, I've told her so many crazy stories, it's unbelievable. And just to manipulate her to get what I needed. But now I'm able to sit there and call her up and just talk to her. I make it a priority. I try to talk to her for an hour every Sunday, every single week, and I've done that for the most part, with the exception of a couple days here and there. But like I said, for the most part, and if I do miss her, I tend to try to make it up. But with that, I guess I'm kind of running out of things to say. But I'm just very grateful to be here, grateful to be sober, and thank you for letting me share.